You can see that here, Jamie, like, the great movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I mean, that was before the Russian invasion, which actually the overall outlook, it looked quite promising. But that's not the picture that actually we have in right now. You can see that here, the changes. And I will point out to the audience, like, the part of the bad and the part of the ugly. And specifically in the case of Mexico, after the invasion, we should be actually factoring worse scenario in terms of the supply chain. I mean, they're going to deteriorate it further, and that's going to put more pressure in terms of the output and in terms of the exports in Mexico. Likewise, I think the other part, or I would say the issue that I'm more concerned, it's about inflation. I mean, there is an issue with global inflation that is going to be eroding consumer demand, or it's going to be disrupting demand for that matter. And then when we see some items like actually driving inflation up in Mexico, rising food prices that you can see here to the left, it has become more acute. And that actually is global, but it's taking a toll in Mexico when we see that the overall outlook for inflation. So all in all, when you think about how actually everything has changed, it has been towards, I would say, towards the worst part. Nevertheless, Mexico remains attractive, and that goes to to the other part of your question, Jamie, at the beginning. And these are, of all the points that we're going to be talking, the key takeaways that I want our audience to get. So first of all, Mexico is going to continue to recover, and it's going to be on the back of exports to the U.S. Nevertheless, because of these global headwinds that you saw in the previous slides, it's going to be actually slowing the momentum that we saw that last year. Like everything in life, like the war in Ukraine will bring headwinds and tailwinds for firms in Mexico. So good things and bad things. But overall, and this is actually the general picture, and I think it aligns, Jamie, with the point of the first polling question that people feel more optimistic. The country remain attractive vis-a-vis other emerging markets, and especially in Latin, when we see that this year we have Brazil contracting by 0.2%. And we also have a lot of electoral volatility, not only in Brazil with the showdown between Lula and Bolsonaro, but also in Colombia right now that we have Gustavo Petro winning the election. And then thirdly, and I think that goes more to the point of the domestic front, firms will need to cope with a business environment where AMLO and Morena will have more political power. And we're going to be unpacking that. And most importantly, when we think about the midterm and the long-term scenario, I think at this point, it is more likely that Morena will retain the presidency in 2024. And that is actually really important to bear in mind when you think about and you planning not only for this year or for the rest of the session, but beyond that, Jake.
For sure. Yeah. And especially in light of, AMLO's COVID response, I think, the fact that Mexico stands as an important and reliable emerging market within multinational portfolios is really something to be said. But in light of all this, can you talk about some of the economic growth revisions that you've been making, over the last couple of months, just given a lot of this global volatility and global dynamic landscape?
Sure. I think that's a good segue, Jamie, and we can start unpacking immediately also in terms of how that, the international juncture has impact. And you can see that here in the title. So basically, like, the Ukraine war has made a dent in our GDP growth expectation. Just look at here. So we have, before the war, we have Mexico growing a little bit more than 2%. And we're right now below consensus. We are now 1.5% of GDP growth because we have made a downward revision to exports, where we actually expect exports now to increase by only 3.5%, particularly because we think the supply chain is going to be impacting the key auto exports in Mexico. That actually, when you measure in terms of total value and the percentage of all the exports of Mexico, it's a big and important part. And with supply chain disruption, that's one of the industries that are going to be hurting the most this year. On the other hand, when you think about global inflation and then, of course, this trend that is pushing inflation up in Mexico, we make a revision in consumer spending because it's going to be taking a toll on real wage mass. And then thirdly, in terms of investment, we have here two factors. The global side, or the global factor, like, investors' appetite actually has been sour after the Ukraine war. And then on the other hand, on the domestic front, when we think about the regulatory uncertainty or policies that the government of López Obrador tried to enact, like the energy reform, that it has taken a toll on investment before this one. And then with this situation, the global situation that it actually has become more dire, definitely we make a revision to investment by only 1.8%. Uh, Having said that, you can see that government spending remained the same. We didn't make a revision because the government has become more assertive in terms of budget execution. And then also, the government will have a little bit more resources aiming this crisis. And then also the fact that we have global oil prices going up. All in all, Jamie, when you factor in, definitely Mexico is not going to grow more than 2% this year. And I would say definitely I wouldn't be surprised when consensus actually next month goes beyond below 2% as well.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for providing where your bias exists. You've talked a little bit about the Ukraine war's impact to the economy. Can you talk about what challenges Mexico is going to be facing moving forward?
Sure. I think that's important, Jamie. And this is actually, I would point out, the most important slide of all the one I'm going to share, at least on the first half, because this is the matrix that we have developed. So you can see that here in terms of the impact of the war in Ukraine on Mexico, it has positive, moderate, and negative. On the positive side, oil prices going up and government revenues too, by default too, are going to go up. And then we see that a moderate impact in terms of trade exposure because Mexico does not have a major trade relationship with Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus, which actually are the cross of this conflict. On the negative side, there is the supply chain cost, which I'm going to explain that in more details. And then, of course, the inflation that it's going to be, I would say, the most dire item in the overall outlook for Mexico in 2022. And then you can see there to the right, there is the social stability where I put it directly or specifically a question mark, a potential gasolinazo if the government cannot do what they're doing right now, which is actually try to cushion the increase of gasoline prices with the oil windfalls that they are receiving. I think they can do that, but that's a risk that we shouldn't downplay, or we shouldn't completely delete it from the landscape as well. And then there is a positive, Jamie. I think Mexico, despite everything, can bring more FDI. But that actually is going to depend, of course, of the government policy. But then also we need to assess that, like, especially, multinationals, they need to weigh Mexico vis-a-vis other emerging markets. And let me unpack this more specifically. When we think about the first item, about high oil prices, I mean, definitely, the situation in Ukraine and the fact that Russia has been facing a lot of pressure with all these unprecedented sanctions has hiked the oil prices. Look at right now, oil prices have been averaging more than $100 the barrel, and we shouldn't be actually ruling out that it can continue to go up if this conflict continues or if it become more protracted. In the case of Mexico, that has been good news in terms of the mezcla, the Mexican oil. Look at just how much it has increased, like by more than 46% since the beginning of this year, and it has been driven by this crisis. And even that, during the month of March, actually the Mexican mezcla averaged more than $100 the barrel. And that actually, how that translates or how that is beneficial for Mexico, just when we think about it, Pemex operational problems continue. Mexico is unlikely to increase oil output. Nevertheless, only with this output, like 1.7 million barrels per day, this is our forecast. So we're expecting the Mexican mezcla to be on average this year at this moment around $82. And that actually is more than 50% of what the federal government calculated the federal budget, which is at 55. So when you think about the oil windfalls and the oil revenues that the government is going to continue to receive, it's substantial, even to the point that through the whole month of March, it has been more than 100% what it was originally calculated.
Hi, my name is Krista Reganey, and I'm the Marketing Director here at FrontierView. I'd like to thank you for watching a segment of this webinar. If you'd like access to the full video and our latest insights, data, and research, sign up for a free trial with us today. Simply scan the QR code on the screen.